I think the smoke smog from California is dimming a little bit here. Let's hope so, because I want to get out there and I want to play some golf. Well, the guy we have this on the line right now, he's quite the golfer himself. He's made a few bucks on the golf course. I think he's made more money at the poker tables, but he's a six-time WSOP champion and been one of the main faces of poker for decades, and we always love it when he takes some time to join us. Some serious topics to get to and some not serious topics to get to with none other than Real Kid Poker himself, Daniel Negreanu, who joins us right now on the line. Daniel, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing great, guys. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for coming on,
Absolutely.
Daniel.
Thanks,
As always,
Daniel.
been a little while since we talked. Now we're going to talk about some fun stuff. Of course, the Vegas Golden Knights, maybe even a little politics with you. But let's start off with something that is obviously very sad in the poker community. Somebody who I've met on a number of occasions, who you were friends with as well. In fact, he commentated some of your wins in the World Poker Tour. None other than World Series of Poker champion, and what a legend in the game of poker, Mike Sexton. Daniel, what was your first reaction? Of course, I would imagine you were very sad when you heard the news of the passing of Mike Sexton. What did he mean to you?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's unanimous in the entire poker community. Like, rarely does the poker community all agree on one thing. And, unanimously, the love and support for Mike was something that, like I said, you just don't see anywhere else. And I really I don't like the term ambassador, poker ambassador, which gets thrown around. But if there ever was one, singular man who changed the landscape for all of us, that's Mike Sexton. Like, he is the poker ambassador. And, for me personally, he allowed me to have the opportunity to play poker for a living and create these televised events. He had a vision. I remember reading here in Las Vegas in the late 90s a magazine called Poker World, where he's talking about corporate sponsorship is right around the corner. And everyone thought he was nuts. No one really gave this guy a chance at succeeding at this, and he did. And, the outpouring support is overwhelming. And like I said, very rarely do you have a guy that nobody has a bad thing to say about.
I agree with you completely. Daniel, I've heard from players like yourself. I've heard from other players that have played with him. When he took down and he won a big pot or he lost a big pot, you would never tell with him which one was the case, because he was such a nice person at the table and such a good winner and loser, where you couldn't even look by his facial expression whether he had just won or lost a pot. Isn't that kind of sum up the kind of person that he was, a man of class?
Yeah, consistently classy. There was just never a time where he wasn't. And I think that the other thing I think a lot of people appreciated, it didn't matter who you were. Obviously, he was friends with all the biggest names in the game, and treated them well and treated them with respect. But he did the same for guys who played $20 little tournaments. He treated everybody with the same amount of respect. Nobody was above the game, if you will. And, I had the pleasure or displeasure of playing with him in the Tournament of Champions years ago. And we played heads up, and I was really impressed. He played a lot. He played way better than I thought. Again, we played till 7 or 8 in the morning. He played 6 hours heads, and he ended up winning. And I remember, just seeing how much it meant to him, because poker itself, has always meant a lot to him. And he always took very, very seriously the idea of being an ambassador of the game. And like I said, he's the only one that I would ever give that title to.
It seems as though when he was a commentator on the World Poker Tour, and there were a lot of reasons why the ratings were so high, right? This was after the Chris Moneymaker era, where poker was just crazy. But it seemed like when he was commentating the World Poker Tour with Van Patten for years, the ratings were through the roof. And like I said, there's a lot of other reasons for that. Big names like yourself. A lot of the big names in poker don't play in all these events anymore, but I think Mike Sexton was a huge part of the ratings, because I think he was a great commentator. I look at a guy like a Gabe Kaplan. He did great with with the cash game poker that was on television, high stakes poker. I look at those two, Gabe Kaplan and Mike Sexton. Those are my two favorite commentators in the history of poker. Would you agree with that? I'm just curious. What did you think about his commentating? Because I thought he was fantastic.
Well, the great thing about Mike when he did commentary is the excitement that he brought to it was genuine. He was just genuinely,
right.
excited. I've had the opportunity of doing some commentary with him, and he'd see a play, and we talk about it in between, off camera, and he was he's blown away by everything that he'd watch and loved the game so much. So I think the authenticity of his commentary is what really drew people. It's hometown guy. He didn't seem elite or elusive for people to connect with him, on a real level. And, he was just, he was just like your buddy that you have a couple beers with.
Yeah, and he was also, I know you don't like the term ambassador, but in a way he was for Poker Stars, right? He was the name and face, as you've been involved with Poker Stars as well. He was a huge part of the online poker movement, right? Was he not?
Well, he was with Party Poker.
Or Party Poker, I'm sorry, yes.
So it's a direct competitor there. Yeah,
right.
No, he
right.
absolutely. So he got started on this thing a long, long time ago. He got started on, this Tournament of Champions idea, then he got started with this online poker thing. He always was thinking of ways to promote the game and obviously, make some money for himself, and he was able to do that. But yeah, he was a visionary. Like, again, he saw poker being played on TV and, thousands of people watching, and everyone sort of said, dude, it's poker. No one's going to watch poker on TV. Give me a break.
Yeah.
But he had a vision and helped make it happen.
So one thing I love about the poker community, yes, you have a lot of guys that have egos, and I don't think Mike Sexton was one of those guys, but, I remember when Chip Reese passed away and some of the legends of the game over time, unfortunately these things happen, some younger than others. You guys always seem, at least the big name players, always seem to come together and put on charity events for the family and do a great job in honoring some of these players. I know it's very early because he just passed away, sadly, but do you think we'll see that down the road, maybe when this damn pandemic is over with and maybe in the World Series of Poker, or we'll have some sort of great way to remember Mike Sexton and you guys will be able to come together and put something together? Have you talked to anyone about that yet?
Well, I mean, there's no question that something like that, in many facets is going to, happen. People have already sort of been discussing it on Twitter, the Sexton Open or the Sexton Cup or, the World Poker Tour Trophy, I think, was already named after him recently. So I'm sure there will be something. And, he was always great about attending charitable events and running some himself. And every time I'd run my St. Jude's event, he was there every year. So I definitely think something in that vein will happen for next year. Like I said, it's rare that you have somebody that was universally loved in the poker community, and he was. So everyone's on board. You put Mike Matusow, who politically is at odds with most of us in the poker world.
Yeah, yes.
It just shows you that, it put together, he put together a nice tribute for Mike when he was in hospice, just a couple of days before he passed. And he had myself and plenty other the big greats in poker just speak directly to Mike and share, some stories and, time with him. And it was good to see people could come together even in this, divided time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Mike definitely divides people on his Twitter account. I follow him as well, but Mike's a good dude. And I think that was great what he did. And I appreciate your stories as well, Daniel. Of course, thoughts and prayers with the Sexton family. And he will always be remembered as one of the greats in the poker world. No doubt about that. All right, Daniel. So let's move. Let's try to lighten the mood a little bit here. And let's talk a little Vegas Golden Knights hockey, because as we all know, Daniel is a huge Vegas Golden Knights fan. And I got to tell you something, Daniel. When they were up 3-1 and then they gave the Canucks a chance to win that series, I said, this is what happens when you give a goaltender some confidence. And luckily they were able to squeak by and win a nail-biter in Game 7. And now they're playing the Dallas Stars, and they struggled to get quality opportunities in Game 1. They're of course, losing in the series 1-0. Game 2 is tonight. What do you make, because I haven't talked to you in a while, what do you make of the Vegas Golden Knights, the way they've played the last couple months and going into the playoffs? And did you expect them to have a Game 7 against the Vancouver Canucks? Let's start there.
Okay, so first and foremost, Vegas, what the thing they did really, really right was they took those games seriously in the round robin to get the 1 seed, because the best possible matchup on paper that you could have come up with for their round 1 and round 2 was specifically Chicago and Vancouver, two teams that they've manhandled in the 3 years of their existence. So they were able to get Chicago, dispense of them rather quickly, and then Vancouver was a tougher series, as you said. And what you saw is a pattern. So often we say, we run into a hot goalie. But I think that's sort of not exactly accurate, okay? What teams have learned, the Minnesota Wild, the Dallas Stars of the world have learned, is the best way to beat Vegas is understand, okay, they're going to outshoot you, they're going to outwork you, they're going to outstats you. But as long as we keep them to the perimeter, and they continue to take 40, 50 low percentage shots, and we clear the front of the net. Vancouver had 5 guys in front of Demko.
Right.
They just said, you know what, we're going to play bend but not break defense, where we're going to wait for our opportunity. Hopefully there's a mistake made. We'll take an odd man rush, and maybe we'll score a couple goals. But we'll let you have all the play. What Vegas lacks, okay, that some other teams like Colorado may, boast, is true game breakers outside of Shea Theodore and to a lesser extent Alex Tuck. This is a team that plays hard, plays well, but when a team dedicates themselves to playing strict defensive hockey against Vegas, we often find these games where you watch it and you're like, Vegas dominated this game. Totally.
Right.
Then why is it still 0-0? Or why did they lose this game in some cases? So, it's really strategic. And I think, I really do think Travis Green is a great coach for Vancouver Canucks, and he outcoached us, frankly, I thought, in those games, because he figured out a system and said, listen, we're the underdogs here, but we're going to give ourselves a chance by, just clamping down, giving Vegas all the perimeter stuff they want, but locking down the middle and the front of the net.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good answer. You're right. A good analyzation of what took place, that's for sure. So when we look at this Dallas Stars team, I think it's fair to say throughout the regular season, they struggled to score goals. This is a Dallas team that didn't really have a lot of offense during the regular season. And then all of a sudden, they've kind of exploded the last few weeks. Not an offensive explosion in Game 1 versus the Knights. I think there's a couple reasons for that, right? Some pretty good goaltending to start. But what do you make of Game 1? What did you make of the breakdown of that game? And how do you expect the Golden Knights to play tonight?
Well, so here's the thing with Dallas, right? Like, people remember the fact that the last 2 years they've been a top defensive team. But look at them the year before and the year before that. They were an offensive juggernaut. They were scoring at will. They were just absolutely crushing people.
Right.
And then they obviously, changed their system. So the capacity to score goals has always been there. It's always sort of puzzling to think, like, how can that lineup not score a lot of goals? Now, in Game 1, we saw them play their system. And I think Vegas, after coming off a Game 6 and a Game 7, where if you watch those games, you watch that team give it everything they had. Vegas was just pouring it on, like every last bit of energy. And you saw in Game 1 against Dallas that the legs weren't quite there. They didn't have that extra jump in Game 1, and to be expected after. I mean, you could say, well, sure, Dallas played a Game 7 too at the same time, but they also didn't have a back-to-back in Game 6, and whatever. So,
right.
Game 1 just looked like a bit of fatigue. I expect them to come back a little bit stronger in Game 2, and have their legs about them, and give it a good old college try.
Is this a Danny Negreanu level 4 play? Would you advise a client of yours to bet on the Vegas Golden Knights tonight, money line or total? What are your thoughts from a gambling perspective?
Because I'm a Vegas Golden Knights fan, I didn't jump on this because I do bet a lot. I had Dallas in the last series against Colorado.
Oh wow,
plus 213.
Wow,
I bet them plus 213. And if I had to choose between Vegas minus 230 and Dallas plus 200, I think that line is a joke. It's absolutely absurd. Like, I don't want to bet on Dallas because it just puts me in a weird spot. But if you were going to pick a side in this series, the idea that Vegas is minus 230, when we just watched, Vancouver took them to 7.
Right.
And Vancouver is not Dallas. They are not as good as Dallas. So when you see that, you understand that there's a lot of variance in hockey, and these teams are closely matched. So I'm not convinced that. And listen, we've been in a scoring drought for a while. Systematically, we've had problems with some just finishing, and so that's been the case from Game 6, 7, and Game 1, 3 straight games. So I don't know. Are they just going to magically figure out how to do that and score some goals? We shall see. But Khudobin is a much better goalie, too, than people give him credit for. And you mentioned one thing, like, why is Dallas scoring goals?
Right.
They also played against Michael Hutchinson, who's probably, and this isn't to diss him, but like he was a third-string goalie. He's probably the worst.
He's not very good.
The worst. Actually,
that's true.
I couldn't think of a goalie that is still on an NHL roster that would have
That's a good point.
worse numbers than Hutchinson. Yep. So yeah, you're going to score goals against a guy like that.
So what kind of a sigh of relief did you have? And I really think that the fact that the Knights and the Canucks played those 2 games back-to-back, and the Canucks are just not as deep as the Knights, despite the fact that Demko was playing out of his mind for X amount of days. What kind of sigh of relief did you have when the Knights were not the first team in professional sports history to lose a series after being up 3-1 2 years in a row?
Well, it really started to feel like deja vu. I'm like, you're watching Game 7, you're like, I've seen this movie before. One team, like, first 10 minutes, once again, Vancouver has exactly 0 shots on goal. Halfway through the game, they have like 6. You're like, this is exactly what happened in Game 6. And you're watching, and you look at the scoreboard, and you're like, it's still 0-0. How is this possible? Anybody with an untrained eye or trained eye, you watch the game, you're like, okay, 51 seconds. 51 seconds was the time of possession that Vancouver had in the Vegas zone in the first period. And you're thinking, well, how can the score be 0-0? So it looked like Vancouver was committed to saying, listen, we're going to stack 5 guys in the box. We're going to hope that Elias Peterson or some of our high-end talent can deflect the puck, have a turnover, and score a lucky goal and win this one. So they set it up in such a way to give themselves the best chance to win, and they almost did. Robin Lehner made an incredible save.
Yeah, he did.
in the third period to keep it from being 1-0 down, and at that point, talk about lockdown. They go even to more of a lockdown mode, and Vegas just couldn't crack the code of Thatcher Demko, who was doing such a great job of rebound control. There was nothing. He wasn't leaving anything sloppy in the crease.
Well, I can tell you right now, I'm sure you would agree, you don't want to go down 2-0 in any series in the NHL playoffs. So this is a game that you got to have.
I think I'm taking the Knights here. They actually the Stars have quite a few injuries as well. They've got 5 players that are out. The Knights have Ryan Reeves is suspended for 1 game, but I like the Knights minus 150. I may look at them puck line.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see what happens tonight, and then we'll get your reaction later on in this series, Daniel. But since you are a 6 5-time World Series of Poker champion. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Kid Poker, Daniel Negreanu. I need your poker read on something, Daniel. We've been having a verbal fight on the air about this. What is your poker read? Do you think that Donald Trump called our brave men and women in uniform losers and suckers? What is your poker read in hearing Donald Trump talk about this? Do you think he's lying? Do you think it's a bluff?
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, how often do you have Fox News and CNN agree on, on the factual, aspect of this?
It's true.
Comment? Obviously, we don't know without a videotape, but what we do have on video is him already doing this. When he flat out called John McCain, he says, "I don't like losers," and he's a loser.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, I don't like people who got captured.
Right.
I like those that weren't captured." So he's already mocked and stuff like that. A war hero in John McCain, who literally, just chose to stay back with his mates, with his troops when he was given the opportunity to leave. But he showed a lot of bravery in that, whether or not you agree with him politically. So he's already shown a propensity to do that. Does it sound like him to me? I mean, absolutely.
Yep.
Do I think there's much worse on tape? Michael Cohen's releasing his book that's coming out in a few days. And
right.
I don't know. I think apparently the Atlantic says they have a lot more. And I think Michael Cohen could sort of really shed some light even more so if he has some recordings of this stuff. Because he's made a lot of claims about what Trump has said. Mm-hmm. And if he has some tapes, that should put it to bed.
I could not agree with you more. This is something that I believe Donald Trump did, in fact, say. All right, so Daniel, you've been known to play golf now and then. Some big money matches on the golf course. I played golf in college. We both love golf. That's what I'm trying to say. What do you think of Donald Trump comparing a police officer at times shooting an unarmed black man to somebody, as he said, choking, missing a 3-foot putt? This isn't somebody talking at the water cooler, in the workplace. This is the president of the United States comparing choking and missing a 3-foot putt to a police officer ending somebody's life. What do you make of that?
Well, when it comes to horrifying analogies, let's remember the important one. 9/11, which was one of the most traumatic experiences in this country's history. Donald Trump is on the news, and what does he have to say? Well, now that the two towers are down, looks like my building is the biggest in New York,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So when you think about his ability to really understand the gravity of an issue and show compassion or show an understanding of what's happening and not make it about himself and find some way to narcissistically brag, it's just sort of not in his repertoire. Like he lacks the capacity to show empathy in these kind of situations that don't, like he always makes it about him. He tries to find a way to do that. So, his ability, so that it doesn't surprise me, that he would say something along those lines. And it's just in line with not just what he's been saying and doing since he's been president, but, his entire career as a slumlord.
Yeah. I agree 100%. All right, so let's go with your poker read analysis on something else here. I'm a Joe Biden supporter. I would imagine you are as well. I'm going to be voting for Joe Biden. I've said that publicly for a couple months now at least. I despise the man in Donald Trump. With that being said, Daniel, my concern are these debates. I think there are a lot of people in this country that are stupid. Will Joe Biden destroy Donald Trump on policy debate? Absolutely. But what do people in this country care about? I believe they care about the insults. I don't think all of them do, but I think a lot of them do. I think Donald Trump might be quicker on his feet with the insults, and I'm not sure Joe Biden is going to go down that rabbit hole. And I'm concerned because I don't think there's any positive to be gained if you're Joe Biden in these debates, where I think on the contrary, I think Donald Trump has a lot to gain in these debates. I think Kamala Harris will destroy Mike Pence. But I'm concerned as someone who will be voting for Joe Biden these upcoming debates. Do you think that's fair?
I don't think it's going to matter much, honestly. I mean, like, how many people do you know or do you think you know that are like, I'm not sure who I'm voting for.
Let's
true. See how these debates go. They're just kind of like theater, right? And listen, Joe Biden did okay in past debates. As long as he plays it safe and doesn't say anything too stupid. The knock on Biden from the right is that he's got dementia and and it's ironic because you have another guy who's a blathering idiot and has been for years, but the rules don't apply to him. Like he's got Adderall flying out of his mouth and cocaine residue and whatever, and his eyes are bulging out of his head because he's a drugged out crackhead, But none of that matters. Like, they have to have an attack on Biden. They have to come up with something. So they come up with this Sleepy Joe nickname that he's, whatever. But listen, I think most of us that are voting at this point, whether it's a case of, you like the fact that Joe Biden is a decent, compassionate man, or simply the fact that you would vote for, like, a turd sandwich if he was running against Donald Trump. Right? I don't think any of that changes based on these debates. I think people it's an overblown scenario. But, like, listen, in the last 4 years, if you're a Trump supporter, okay, you're a Trump supporter, good luck to you. If you're not, you're not going to go, you know what? Trump made really good points in that debate.
You're right.
I'm going to switch.
You're right.
It's kind of
You're right.
It's overblown.
I agree with you. I think it's around 5%. And I think at this point, if you don't know who you're voting for, you're a moron. That's just my personal opinion. I think there's maybe 4 or 5% of this country where the debates might actually matter.
I think the debates may do one thing specifically, okay? So there's obviously people that would support Biden or support Trump. Like, the one thing that debates could do is get people who wouldn't actually go vote to say, you know what? I like this man. I want to make sure that I vote for him. And I think Biden will do a good job of that, because what I think Biden shows, and I think it's important in this time of what we're dealing with as a country, is he shows a genuine compassion for people and caring that Trump is incapable of, being authentic in those ways. So I think if Biden can use the debates as a way to say, listen, I hear you, I feel your pain, I empathize with what you're going through, and I want to make things normal and better again.
Agreed.
And I think that could bring more people to the polls. And really, I think what he needs to do is twofold. So one thing he's already done is he's condemned the actions of rioters and looters.
Right,
and
both sides, right.
Destroying buildings. He completely condemns that, as he should.
Right.
The only group of people that he somewhat has to bring in, of course, he's got the centrists and a lot of Republicans who are defecting, but the group of people on the far left who just shoot their foot to spite their nose, or whatever the hell that stupid saying is, who don't see how clear the choice is for them. Like, one person, okay, you might not like Biden. He might not be your guy. He's not progressive enough. He's a Republican in disguise or whatever. He's better than Trump for you. But if you don't show up, you may have 4 more years of this, or you may have another 20, because, Trump he's not going to want to leave. Like, he's already setting things up, claiming that the election is going to be rigged, which I think there's a decent chance it will be rigged in his favor. But if he loses this election, I don't think there's going to be, a peaceful transition of power that we've seen in the last 100 years.
Agree, and he's openly already admitted that. Okay, Daniel, last question for you. If you had to set the line right now on who you think is going to win in November, where would you set it at? Who would be the favorite right now, Trump or Biden?
Well, because of cheating, I think it's a lot closer. And cheating can take on a lot of forms.
That's true.
Voter suppression, throwing out, getting
true.
rid of mailboxes, trying to burn votes,
right.
Having as much Russian interference help as you can allow.
Right.
I think it's a lot closer. So I would actually say I would make it really close to a pick'em, and I would make it.
Wow.
I would make it closer. But I would make maybe Biden like minus 115 at this point.
Agree.
Again, because this isn't a case of people always mistake the popular vote and the polls for how the game works. Great, big deal. He won the popular vote. He didn't win the game because the game comes down to a few specific states where you have to convince enough people, and the margins can be as little as 10 to 20,000 people. So that allows it to be a much closer race. Because obviously, if California counted for what it should and New York counted for what it should in terms of percentages, there would be no race.
I agree. I hate the Electoral College. I could not agree with you more. Keep in mind as well.
I think we need the Electoral College. I do. And Andrew Yang makes some really good points about it. It just needs to be proportionate.
And it's not. And it's not.
You've got North Dakota and South Dakota electing 2 and 2, right? Or whatever,
stupid.
representatives for just splitting up a small little place. Well, okay.
You're right.
California needs just to count proportionately. That's all. And you can keep the Electoral College.
You're right.
Just, have it a little more proportional.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. You're absolutely right. I think they need to tinker with it a little bit. No question about that.
By the way, the odds have flipped from Joe Biden. I think offshore he was minus 170 about 2 months ago. I've seen Donald Trump as high as minus 130 now. So the odds have slipped offshore. And obviously in Las Vegas there are no odds.
But I think what Daniel is saying is right. I think it should be just about a pick 'em all. Hey, listen, Daniel, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories about Mike Sexton. It really means a lot to us and the listeners. And I'll tell you something. This series, I think it's going to go deep with Dallas. And when it does, we'd love to have you on again within the next week or two. But always appreciate it, Daniel. You're always great when you come on, and we always appreciate your time. Thanks so much, man. We appreciate you.
All right, guys. Always a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Daniel.
There you go. Real Kid Poker.